Welcome.
Welcome. Hello, Andrea.
Andrea, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Okay, I think we're both mute. Hi. We should know how to mute and unmute by now. Thank you all.
It's real. The struggle is real.
Right. No.
Very real. But we just had a fabulous time in the green room, Caroline and I. So that was great.
Oh, good.
Awesome.
Good.
That's why I have it. So I think you already know us both. Obviously, Jonathan Cohn.
Zayda Ortiz, how are you? Welcome.
Great to see you all.
Very excited to speak with you this afternoon, and we really appreciate that you've taken the time to be with us today. It's really great to have you here.
Oh, I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
And we're going to rotate with asking kind of the set of questions that we have here. I'll start out with the general one, and if you want, just take maybe like a 2-minute openers to help us kind of move through things. Up. Tell us who you are and why you're running, as I'm sure that you're used to doing across the trail.
Thank you all, and thank you for having me, and also thank you for everything you do. I know it's a thankless task, and to volunteer folks, to get folks organized around specific issues in this race and across races and in the state. So I want to start from a place of gratitude. Thank you also for your flexibility on the questionnaire. I am really grateful and really appreciate that as well. So obviously I jumped into the Attorney General race, and I jumped in recognizing a couple of things. One, that even as we sit on this Zoom, we know that many families are struggling and very worried about whether or not they're going to thrive and survive and prosper coming out of COVID. They're also extremely frustrated with government. But what I've been stressing in this campaign is that we live in the best state in the nation, a state with such potential and promise, and with a government that can do so much more to address the very issues that our residents are grappling with. And how do I know that? Because I've lived it. As some of you know, my childhood was filled with incredible instability. My mom actually died when I was 8 months old, going to visit my father, who was incarcerated at the time. My father and my brothers cycled in and out of the prison system, and my twin brother, Andre, died 10 years ago while in the custody of the Department of Correction as a pretrial detainee. So I've dedicated my entire life to turning that pain and trauma into purpose. I'm the first in my family to go to college, the first in my family to go to law school. And I've dedicated my life to ensuring that every resident in this state has access to the same opportunities I had. And how have I done that? I started my career representing children for free at a local nonprofit in education cases. I've worked as an attorney for Governor Deval Patrick. I've worked as a general counsel at a regional planning agency that covered 101 municipalities in the state. And of course, as a local official, elected official in Boston. And so I'm running for Attorney General, stressing that the office is more than about litigation. It's more than the chief law enforcement office. This office has every tool, every resource, definitely the talent to make sure that every single family has access to healthcare, an excellent education for their children, access, of course, to the tools to stay in their home, to grow their wealth, all the tools to deal with any racial disparity that you can think of, to ensure the communities in which we live and are raising our children and the next generation, that those are safe and prepared and resilient for the next climate event or the next pandemic. And of course, all the tools to protect us against any type of predatory scam you can think of, especially our seniors. And it really is about making sure that the next generation, like my 2 boys, does better than the last generation. And so I'm really excited to be on here with you. Of course, hope to earn your support and look forward to answering your questions. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And yeah, I love, just to say, I love your personal narrative. I think that it's important that we hear these stories, and I know how difficult, it is because,
thank you for saying that.
People of color, and especially in these spaces, our stories need to be spoken. And I mean, we all have family that have been incarcerated, unfortunately,
Right.
Especially in the last 30, 40 years. So I think that it's important to own that and to just, talk about that, because, it unfortunately does not happen in our Black and it happens more frequently in Black and brown families.
Thank you for naming that. And if I'm looking down, you're down here on my screen, but I really appreciate you naming that. And as someone who still has folks that are incarcerated, right? This system continues to touch our lives in many ways.
Yeah, absolutely. So on that note, this is Progressive Massachusetts, and we are talking about progressive issues And John, give me 1 second. I literally just unclicked the questions. We're here today because it's Progressive Mass. So tell me, what does progressive mean to you? What do you see the biggest obstacles are to achieving our progressive change in the Commonwealth?
For me, it's about being bold, courageous, and taking risk, right? Particularly on issues that we've been talking about for generations, and being so intentional that in the next, say, 4, 5, or 10 years, we're closing the gaps, right? We're not talking about rates of poverty being the same, rates of incarceration being the same, the wealth gap getting worse. It's actually working to eliminate those things. And I think that's what the progressive movement to me is all about. The barriers. Who's in office currently, right? Some folks, of course, get there and don't make it about the people, are not bold and courageous, are not about taking risks. I think it's also about inclusivity. We know that this is a movement that some do not feel a part of. I live in Mattapan. I say to my parents, the Progressives Forum, I'll be on later today. They're like, oh, what's that? They should know and they should care because it is relevant to their daily life. And so for me, being intentional about expanding the tent, particularly for communities of color, is important. And that is, I think, one barrier that all of you, of course, are working towards changing. But I do think the representation piece matter. The coalition building has to continue in order to get things done. And lastly, I'll just say accountability. I believe in keeping my word on issues and things as simple as if I say I'm going to call you back, I call you back. For me, that's basic integrity. If I say I'm going to do something on a particular issue, I'm going to do that. We may not always agree, but I believe in being straightforward, transparent, and honest, and also including as many voices as I can in the process while being thoughtful.
Great, thank you. And so one thing about the office itself, so there's a fundamental tension in the role of Attorney General. On the one hand, you're kind of an independently elected official, and often kind of described as the people's attorney. And on the other hand, you're the attorney for state government. And how would you approach kind of cases where you in fact disagree with the actions or positions of state government, and being asked to defend them? And if you have any kind of examples on that, feel free to share.
That's right. And it's a great question that, of course, is already come up. And I think it's setting a vision and certain values in the office. And for me, that is about transparency, accountability, justice. I'm a very faith-driven person, so I also lift up morality and seeing the humanity in folks. The example that tends to rise to the top for me is the Department of Correction and the House of Correction, anything related to the prison system. Because as you can imagine, this work is personal, but this run in particular is probably more personal because this year marks 10 years since my twin brother, Andre, passed away. And the AG's office could have been an office that actually looked into or explored what happened there. We know there are other families that have been affected by either a death in the system or where they didn't receive adequate healthcare, which of course is relevant right now with COVID. And so yes, you have the responsibility to represent an agency, but you have a whole bunch of tools in your toolkit to say, if something goes against our values and our principles, we're either not going to defend you, we're not going to allow you to take a certain legal position in a case, we're going to push you to change your policies, your practice, your culture, your regulations. And I think those tools need to be actually leveraged even more, particularly in the context of criminal legal reform, prison reform in particular, and some other issues as well.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I'm just losing it here. Cold medicine's kicked in. Voters may remember you from running for mayor of Boston, and you were also city council person. I'm curious what appeals to you about this office and what skills and expertises do you bring uniquely to this role?
I think the first piece is, I will say, I don't jump into anything lightly. So before I jumped into this, I prayed quite a bit, but I also got encouraging calls. You know, when Governor Baker made his announcement and it looked like our AG was going to run, some folks who work in the office, other folks I worked with as well in my legal career said, Andrea, you should really look at this. I prayed on it and ultimately jumped in thinking that there were some unique things I could bring in particular, but ultimately took the leap of faith and dusted myself off after thinking about my twin brother, because January was the 10th year and my family still doesn't know under what circumstances he passed. That lack of transparency, that lack of accountability still exists in our systems. And if we are going to change that, we need bold leadership that not only brings a personal lens to the work, of course, on certain issues, but also leadership. What is unique for me, I'll start with my legal experience. My legal experience is different. Not only have I worked in state government as an attorney for Governor Patrick, I interacted, of course, and worked with the Government Bureau and the AG's office quite a bit. I drafted legislation for Governor Patrick. All of the transportation agencies, education agencies, the Commission Against Discrimination were all within my portfolio for the governor. I've worked as a general counsel at a regional planning agency, so a quasi-state org that covers 101 municipalities. So interacting with various councils, various legal councils across various municipalities to move a regional response to opioid crisis, public safety forward. I'm the only candidate that's represented children in direct service work for free. School discipline cases, not only against traditional public schools, against charter schools and other MECO programs and other programs as well as, of course, kids who had other types of arrangements or students that had other types of arrangements. And most of those families had to fall below the poverty line, and a lot of families with disabilities. So that legal background is more, I think, comprehensive and unique. But the other piece that is critically important and different about my candidacy is my legislative background. This office is more than the top cop. You actually want to solve criminal legal reform or prison reform. In addition to the tools in the office, you have to be able to get legislation done at the State House. I'm the only candidate that's actually passed legislation through the State House as an attorney for Governor Patrick and as an elected official. The same in the context of housing. I was proud that the CPA was my first piece of legislation. In addition to solving issues around discrimination in the housing context and affordability, you're going to have to be able to work in the State House to get things done. So that legislative record and leadership coupled with the legal background is, I think, quite distinct and unique. And lastly, I'll say the lived experience. And if we say we care about representation mattering, particularly as we talk about Justice Jackson and Senator Booker standing up for her, he stood up for her because he felt and understood what that woman was going through because of the skin in which he lives. So representation mattering in this moment in time, I think, is very relevant if we want the AG's office to reach more people and for them to actually be a partner in this work.
Great, thank you so much. And to get into a little bit over to some specific issues. So Massachusetts as a coastal state will be disproportionately hit by the impacts of climate change. What role do you see for the office playing in strengthening our response to the climate crisis?
A lot. And I will say, I always give credit where credit's due. As I am crisscrossing the state already, there are folks who are talking about the current leadership of our Attorney General in raising our profile nationally on the issue of climate and environmental justice, including working in partnership with California, the California Attorney General and some others. So I think, of course, enforce the laws that are on the books that we know is not happening. I was just talking with some folks out in Duxbury who have concerns around certain issues. Other folks talking in Ipswich, I'm concerned about certain provisions of our climate laws that are not being enforced. Where I think we can actually go farther has to do with environmental injustices. The office right now is addressing asthma rates, for example, in Springfield, lack of green space in Chelsea, very small affirmative policy measures that can absolutely be expanded to include tree canopy, all the things we've been talking about, frankly, in Boston. We could be doing the same in our gateway communities, absolutely, of course, in the western part of the state. And then the jobs piece. There are a lot of folks talking about workforce development opportunities. That too could be an affirmative policy initiative under this umbrella of addressing climate that I think the office could work with other agencies, of course, whoever the next governor is, and municipalities on these issues too. So pushing the envelope on the affirmative policy side, I think, is critically important.
Thank you, thank you. I'm going to talk a little bit about racial and economic inequalities. You know, Massachusetts is one of the most prosperous states in the country, but yet we're deeply rooted in racial and economic equality. So what would you do to address such issues?
A few things. One, obviously we've been in the race for almost 2 months now. And so we've been doing various forums and conversations together. And anytime someone says, oh, what are your top 3 priorities? I notice that some folks list, my opponents, they will list racial disparities. I don't list that. That's the norm. Everything that that office does should be through a racial equity lens and an equity lens. This includes, of course, the BIPOC community, the disability community, and so many others. That should be the norm. And so I think if we're going to be serious about closing these gaps and we do that work through that lens, we will actually begin to close gaps. And as council president in Boston, I was proud to get resources to push the council to use that lens in doing the work. The things I would focus on, housing, of course, continues to come up. We know if you have a home or if you can stay in your home, people are worried about a potential foreclosure crisis coming out of COVID. The office has tools to address it. It did it in 2008 and 2009. Help people stay in their homes. You can also establish funds to actually help folks build assets to buy a home. And we know if you have a home, if we start there, particularly with single family households or single moms, you have a way in which not only to give them a home, but also capital or potential capital to start a business or to do something else out of that asset. So there are other creative programs that I know of where people are using these to build wealth. Housing, I think, is a big one. Healthcare. I don't care, you can have a great home, but if you are dying or you don't have the tools to deal with your mental health, we should all be concerned. A lot of conversations right now with respect to health disparities that need to be addressed. There's some great coalition work going on. And I think they want the next AG to focus on racial disparities in healthcare, which I would do, but also the cost and accessibility of healthcare, critically important. That is, of course, through some of the conversations about mergers and consolidations, conversations through the trust department, but consumer protection side of things, there's a lot that the office is doing and could be pushing more to address healthcare disparities, which of course affect your economic well-being. And then lastly, economic development. You have receivership powers. You have abilities to go and work with municipalities to activate vacant lots. We did that in Boston. That work is continuing under Mayor Wu. So there's a whole bunch of great things that could be going on the economic front that I would love to see the office get more involved in. I'm being
awesome.
Mindful of time. I could keep going. So
No. We're and you're touching on things that we're going to talk about. Yeah, so John, we're like, we got 5 minutes still.
Yeah, and like, yeah, you're doing well with time. So how would you describe yourself? So if elected, how would you describe yourself as different from your predecessor in the office?
A few ways. One thing I do want to acknowledge, and this is from conversations with every AG going back to Riley, and I didn't know all of them very well, but everyone talked, including first assistants, people who've worked in the office over the years, how you build upon the legacy of the one who came before. And so recognizing what has been going well, and there are things that are working well, but then what could we do better? Criminal legal reform, policing reform are near and dear to me because they're personal. And I have a track record of delivering on those issues and taking them on even when they were hard and difficult. That would not change. Public corruption also, I think, goes within that umbrella. And I know people want to see more work and advocacy there, particularly when you think about either police misconduct or things that are happening in our prison system or the cradle to prison pipeline. There are other things within these, this sort of larger umbrella issue that I would want to address along with public corruption. The other piece is racial disparities, being even more intentional, and that builds upon the racial equity lens they're using right now in the office, but even more intentional on closing those gaps on certain issues is really important to me. And then lastly, I will say, this office, I think unlike any other, all of the bureaus, the tools are in one office. So how do you help a family, right? A family is not just, say, dealing with wage theft. They're also dealing with a fear of foreclosure, mental health, guns or violence in their community, domestic violence. This office has every tool to be able to help a family in a more, like a holistic way. So for me, it's how do you look at the intersectionality of these issues? I use my own personal narrative as an example, but other families have examples too. So pushing the office to be more intersectional in its response to helping a family, whether that's a family of 1 or a family of 25, I think is really important.
All right, well, we've got 2 more minutes, so I'm going to try to condense the thing that is my little sweet spot, education.
We can go over, so don't worry.
We can go over, okay. So education is something that's very dear and near to me. You know, I wouldn't be where I'm at if it weren't for a lot of teachers who looked out for me. And so shout out to teachers here on the call. I live in Malden, Massachusetts. We have a very infamous charter school, and they have discriminated against a lot of my African-American neighbors because of the way they wear their hair, or you know, because of the way they dress or the way they act. And so my first part of my question is about specifically charter schools and what you think about them. The second part is also about schools and how we educate people. So kind of an intersectionality. You know, you are in Boston, and right now, currently, the receivership is something that is a hot button issue. What is your opinion on it? What do you think? And we'd love your take kind of on what's going on with both of those things, and how, you know, our Black and brown children are educated.
That's right. I agree with you. I would not be sitting here without an excellent education. And I stressed in every race before, I went to 5 Boston public schools, and all 5 of them were excellent. Some of them not so much anymore. And one of my middle schools is about to close. So clearly we have work to do. And also I see education as one of the reasons my brothers, not just my twin, my brothers went this way and I went this way, because of access and what I had and what they did not get, including over discipline of them, largely based on their gender and their skin. And so for me, I have always focused on this because poor families in particular know that this is a way out, particularly for their children in many ways, while we address poverty, which we're not going to solve overnight. And so my position on charter schools are a few things. One is I've always believed in holding any school system accountable, whether that's traditional public schools, charter schools, any school, because that's how I started my career. Most of my cases were either school discipline cases or IEP cases, a lot against charter schools, pushing back on push-out cases, expulsion cases, calling that out. I also did a lot of work working with advocates, MAC and many others, on this cradle to prison pipeline, and the dismantling of that system, was at the table for reforming legislation with respect to school discipline and keeping our children in school. And so I believe in holding charter schools accountable to not over disciplining our kids. And I know it happens still in different places, but it also happens in traditional public schools. I also want to hold them accountable too. All systems that fail our kids should be held accountable. My support of charter schools has been grounded in, frankly, my role as a district counselor previously in Mattapan and Dorchester, which is predominantly a district of color. I live in Mattapan. My children, my 2 boys, still have a 5% chance of getting into a high quality Boston public school. Some downtown neighborhoods, it's 80%. So where do those families go? They tend to look at charter schools as a choice, or MECO, or if they're lucky, they get a scholarship. And most of the kids that were going to the charter schools in my district were Black. And so I didn't want to judge that choice. And for me, my stance on the issue was standing with them. That being said, there is absolutely a way the AG's office can play a greater role in strengthening our traditional public school systems, so our kids don't have to go somewhere else. They don't need another choice. Yes, that's more equitable funding. It also means, in addition to funding, working in partnership, of course, with teachers, parents, more coalition building out of the AG's office and their well-being and youth well-being unit, or children's unit. I also think it's an issue the AG's office can be more out in front on. There's a powerful bully pulpit. We should be talking about literacy rates, particularly in communities of color or English learners. We should be talking about the fact that our kids are dropping out of school, or they're going to community college, not having all the requirements and incurring student debt. We should be lifting up these inequities every day and then saying, what are we as a larger community going to do about it? And I think there's a whole bunch of tools to play. And then lastly, receivership. I was in the weeds, of course. I'm not sure where this city is now. Obviously, I'm not sure where our mayor is now. I will tell you, it is disappointing that we're going to have to go through another superintendent search. We're going to have to go all over again, because we know that sometimes stands in the way of moving the needle forward. I don't care what company or nonprofit you run, that turnover in leadership is a challenge for families. I know teachers are working hard. I have a son who's at the Kinney School in Dorchester, a K-1 student. They're working extremely hard. They need more resources and supports. And so I do think it's a conversation for the mayor. I don't want to overstep, but I will say any municipality that is not serving our kids well or doing right by our kids, I think the state has to be a partner in that work. And sometimes the partnership goes well, sometimes it doesn't. And I know that there's blame, I think, on both sides.
Thanks. And then we'll do a few light questions and then we can kind of go to closer. And Zayda, if you want to, like, I can start off with those if you want to tag kind of between them.
So questions like my favorite color or the name of my dog or something.
Your favorite, how about your favorite binge during COVID? What have you been binging?
Ozark with my husband.
That is intense. No, it isn't. Yeah, us
he
too.
Found that. I was like, what is this? That show's crazy.
I grew up in Oklahoma, so that's where the country folk went for vacation in the Ozarks. So.
Ozark.
So what's your favorite place in Massachusetts to go to when you need to recharge?
It's probably out in Berkshire County. I actually went to Lee and just hiking out there. But yeah, there's a bed and breakfast in Lee that I actually love.
Awesome, awesome. And just in closing, after you talk to a voter, how would you want them to describe you in one sentence?
That I am a leader, one of integrity, compassion, and empathy, purpose-driven, and action-oriented. I am progressive and I'm pragmatic. I want to get things done. And I want folks to feel after engaging with me, one, not only that compassion and empathy and love and joy and optimism, because that's just who I am, but also that they can be a partner in the work in order that for us to get things done.
Great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us this afternoon. If you can drop in the chat if people want to kind of learn more about your campaign, kind of website, etc. And thank you again for your time.